Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, we're going to discuss internet access in regards to prompt engineering. Now, we've already seen that Bard comes with the ability to perform Google searches and then parse that information into its output based on your prompt. For example, when we asked for a list or table of the top 10 US cities, we saw that Bard had the capability to actually run an internet search and grab information like Wikipedia links to cities related to our request. Now, while sometimes you don't need to explicitly ask Bard to run a search, it can be really helpful to specifically ask for an internet search, in particular on specific URLs in your prompt request. Let's see a few examples of this inside of Bard. Okay, here I am inside of Bard. Now, we already know that Bard itself has been trained on a lot of the internet and pretty much the entirety of Wikipedia. So Bard already has its own internal understanding of major events and figures. For example, let's imagine I wanted to learn more about Jonas Salk. I could just ask Bard for some information or a summary of his life. So for example, I can say, please give me a summary bullet point list of the life of Jonas Salk. I'll hit enter, and currently there's no real way to know whether or not Bard is going to just provide an understanding of Jonas Salk based off what it's been trained on, or do its own URL search and provide other sources. So for example, here I can see Getty Images. So this is not technically a source. We'll see what sources look like later on. We can see it's just showing me an image of Jonas Salk working in a lab, which is pretty cool. We can also see it includes things that may or may not be super relevant to the output that I want. For example, it's linking here to a children's book about the polio pioneer Jonas Salk. Maybe or not, or maybe not you find that interesting. And then we can see he has his own Salk Institute, and there's a photo of him there with a link, also links to Britannica. And I can also check out the other drafts here, and we can see some of them are using other sources, other images, other links. Here's a Wikipedia link, etc. Now let's imagine I wanted to specifically use this Wikipedia article as a source. How can I force Bard to use that URL? Well, we just need to tell Bard to use the URL as a source. And the word source is going to be pretty important here. So we're going to say, give me a short summary of the life of Jonas Salk using this URL as a source. And if you really want to make sure it's using it as a source, you can further clarify using some spacing. Make sure to source reference this URL. So you can just include it a couple times with the idea that you're directing Bard to have a source reference and then the URL. So now when I'm going to submit that, Bard is going to be able to use that as a source reference. And in just a second, you'll see what I mean by the idea of a source. So we can see that it particularly described that it reviewed a website and then it links that website. That lets you know that this response is not just from the internal memory, if you will, of Bard's large language model. Instead, it's understanding that it reviewed something. And this is what sources should look like. We saw in our previous response that there was no sourcing information at the bottom. Sourcing is going to look like a separate thing after the output. And if I regenerate this draft, I should again see something that looks like a source. And depending on how you ask for information, it could actually number different sources. So this looks pretty similar, but let me edit my prompt that instead of saying give me a short summary, I'm going to say give me a bullet point list of the life of Jonas Salk. I'll go ahead and update that, and maybe I can try to get Bard to show you that numerical sourcing information. Basically what it does is it'll have a little number next to something and then define where it was sourced. This is kind of the same thing here. I can regenerate these drafts, but hopefully you get the idea that now I can see, okay, sources used, number one was Wikipedia. So that's a pretty basic example. Let me show you something maybe a little more complex or something that you hadn't really thought of. Clearly, I didn't really need to direct Bard to do an internet search for Jonas Salk. It was kind of doing that on its own already. But what if I need a little help based off information that I know is in a publicly available URL? For example, here I can see my instructor page, and I know the URL for this page. Let's imagine I'm applying for jobs and I need a resume really quickly, and I have a URL of information. It's just not structured the way I want it. Well, what I can do is I can copy that URL and say something to Bard like, I need a CV slash resume for Jose Portilla based off the information of or on this URL. I'll hit enter. And so now, again, I'm directing Bard to use a particular URL and then give me some sort of output format. So it understood that this was using a Udemy profile. And then it gave me a summary, and all this information is based what it found on that page. It tells me about my education, that I'm a data science instructor trainer, I was a research assistant, etc. And then it told me the websites that are reviewed. If you don't see this extra icon saying websites reviewed or sources cited or something similar to that, it means it did not use the URL. And you may need to do a little bit of prompt engineering to coax Bard to make sure it's using that source in its internet search. But again, hopefully this kind of opened your mind to different ideas of now any URL on the internet that's publicly accessible, you can tell Bard, hey, go look at this URL and then respond using that information. Maybe you want to reformat the website's information. Maybe you want a summary of that information, etc. Super useful to combine the power of a Google search with Bard. Okay, we'll see you at the next lecture.